Hi everyone, this is May Park. Welcome to another video tutorial on my blog and YouTube channel. Today I'm going to show you how to create a dimensional watercolor card using the stems and dies from honeybee stems. In this video, I'm sharing 3 ways to watercolor your floral images using the Mijello Mission Gold watercolor set. I'll be also sharing the behind the scenes video at the end. These are some of the new stems and dies from honeybee stems spring release. I must mention that it was like opening a gift when I opened the package from Honeybee Stems. They also include some free coloring cards and stamp and die with every order in the package, which I think everyone would appreciate. Anyway, this is my first time playing with their products and I absolutely love their clean and simple yet cute designs. For today's project, I'm going to use the Spring Blossoms stamp set and coordinating dies. I already stamped my images on a piece of print paper to test out the placement of my flowers and leaves. I always have A2 size print papers handy to practice my projects so I don't waste my Nina Solo white cardstock or watercolor paper. This step also helps me seize my new stamps to get better impression for my stamping. You can stamp and color your images directly on the watercolor paper to create one layer card if you want to. However, I'll be using my test stamping piece as a guide when I build up my die-cut images later. When it comes to watercoloring, my favorite paper is Artist Cold Press watercolor paper. But in this video, I'm going to use the Strathmore hot press watercolor paper for the first time. I've always wanted to try out the hot press watercolor paper since it has smooth surface which is good for stamping. I'll be using my original Misty stamping tool for stamping today. If you don't have this tool, you could use a regular acrylic block or any other stamping positioners. I'm just using Misty so I can stamp several images at once. I'm going to position my stamps on my watercolor paper, then I'm inking on my stamps with the Simon Says Stamp embossing ink and stamp them on the paper. I'm going to stamp the images one more time with the embossing ink to make sure I get a good impression. You could stamp your images with waterproof black ink if you want your images to have intense outlines. Or you could stamp the images with a Timo's Distress Ink Antique Linen for no-line watercoloring. But this time, I'll be heat embossing my images with white embossing powder to get more soft look of my watercolor images in the end. While the ink is still wet, I'm going to sprinkle some alternate pure white embossing powder over the stamped images and tap the excess powder off my paper. You could use some clear embossing powder or gold embossing powder if you want to. I'm using my dry paintbrush to flick away any embossing powder from sticking to unwanted areas. Then I'm going to preheat my embossing gun for about 10 seconds until it reaches its maximum temperature. And I heat stamp my images with my heat tool until they are completely melted. Make sure to be careful not to touch the embossed images until they are cool. Otherwise, you will smudge your embossed images. Now it's time for watercoloring. Here I have my Mijello Mission Gold 36 watercolor set, number 1, number 2, and number 4 round paint brushes, clean water, and paper towel ready on my desk. Mijello Mission Gold watercolors is my favorite watercolors as they have such vibrant and translucent colors. I'm going to show you the first way to watercolor your images. If you have enough time or patience and you want to add a unique look to your images, this technique will work for you. I'm going to wet my paper with clean water first using my number 4 paintbrush. Then I'm going to mix up some light red and lay down the pigment on my petal for the first layer. I'll be using my paper towel here and there to pick up the excess water or pigment. While the color of paint is still wet, I'm going to go over the first layer with more pigment and diffuse the color using a wet paintbrush. I'm not sure if it's only me, but I found that water is not moving well and the color isn't flowing into the moistened area on the hot pressed watercolor paper compared to the cold pressed watercolor paper. Once I pick up some pigment from the watercolor palette with my wet paintbrush, I'm going to add tiny dots toward the bottom of each petal. Then I'm going to rinse my paintbrush off with clean water and remove the excess water using a paper towel. Next, I'm going to go over the paint to diffuse the color using a wet paintbrush and pull the color out from the darker dots. Depending on the size of your paintbrush, you can achieve a slight different look. I'm going to add a bit of yellow to my petals to create an organic color along the way. When it comes to color mixing, I prefer to mix the colors on the paper instead of pre-mixing them on the palette. Then I will repeat the same process to color the rest of my petals. Now I'm going to turn on some music and speed up the process so you can watch me color the first flower image. And I'll be back soon to show you the second watercolor technique. For my second watercolor technique, I'll be following the same process in the beginning, then I'll be adding thin lines using my number 2 and number 1 paintbrushes. After my first 2 layers are dried, I'm going to add some shading and details using my number 1 and number 2 round paintbrushes. I'm just adding some thin strokes to my petals where the shades should be. Now I'm going to show you the last watercolor technique, which is very easy and quick. I'm going to pick up some pigment with my wet paintbrush and I'm applying light color first for the base layer. I'm making sure my paper is evenly saturated with water. You can start by wetting your watercolor paper first with clean water if you want to. I'm loosely watercoloring the entire flower with less pigment and lots of water. It's important to keep the colors clean and bright for the first washing. Adding paint to a wet layer of paint on the paper creates a soft, diffused look as the colors mix. This technique is useful for diffusing shapes when you don't want too much details. It's important to start painting the flowers while the first layer wash is still wet. As long as the paper is still wet, you can easily make corrections if something goes wrong. Just blot your brush thoroughly and lift the paint back off the paper. In some cases, you may need to add clean water to the surface before lifting, or you can use paper towel to wipe off the color. Then I'll be bringing more colors to my images to add shading to the bottom of each petal before the previous layer is dry. This time I'm adding more pigment and less water. I'll be coloring the rest of my images using wet on wet watercolor technique as I don't want to have too detailed images. Now I'm going to turn on some music again and speed up the process so you can watch me color. I'll be back once I'm done watercoloring. Once my coloring is done, I'm going to separate dies from the Spring Blossoms die set by clipping the connection points using my metal snipper. I'm also removing rough edges on the dies to prevent from hurting my fingers when I handle dies. I'm storing my dies on a plastic tray temporarily for keeping them in one place so I can find and grab my dies easily. Now I'm going to do some die cutting. I'll place my coordinating dies over the watercolor images and secure them on the paper using washi tape so they won't move while die cutting. After placing my paper between cutting plates, I'll be running the dies through my Spellbinder's platinum die cut machine. I'm going to continue die cutting until I cut all of my watercolored images. And I ended up not using all of my die cuts, but it's still okay because I can always use die cut leftovers for my future projects. Here is the closer look at my watercolored images. Which watercolor image do you like best? I hope you find the watercolor technique you'd like to give it a try. I already pre-cut a few papers into 4¼ inch by 5½ inches from different colors of cardstock. I'm going to arrange my die cuts on each panel temporarily to see which cardstock will match with my die cut images. Then I ended up using alternate wood grain white cardstock for my card base. I'm going to mount my panel on the A2 size top folding white card base using alternate glue tape. Now it's time to assemble my card. I'm going to move around my die cut flowers and leaves to find a perfect placement before I mount them on the card front. Once I'm happy with the arrangement of my die cuts, I'll be mounting some of the die cuts on the card front using 3M foam tape. Next, I'm going to work on my sentiment. Since I wasn't sure which die cut word would work with my floral card, I'm going to die cut the words from the both Love You die set and Sweet die set using alternate mini blossom die cut machine. Then I decided to go with the Sweet die cut as it's big and bold enough to bring my floral design together. Since I already know which sentiment die I will use, I'm going to mount the rest of my die cuts in place using 3M foam tape. I'm using 2 layers of foam tape for some of the die cut flowers to give extra dimension. I spent about 10 to 15 minutes building my floral arrangement as I was too careful about the placement of each die cut. Then I'm trimming the excess die cuts around the edge of my card front using scissors. Next, I'm going to pull out the Sweet die again from the Sweet die set. I'll be die cutting the words 7 times out of white cardstock first using alternate mini blossom die cutting machine. Since I'm running out of my gold glitter paper, I'll be creating my own glitter paper. I'm attaching some double-sided tape on a piece of white cardstock and die cut the sweet word out of the paper. Then I'm removing the backing sheet to reveal the sticky surface and apply some gold glitter over my die cut word. I'm patting down the gold glitters with my fingers to make sure they stick to the paper. I'm mounting my die cuts all together to make a thick chipboard word using a glue pen. Making a chipboard sentiment takes time, but it creates a big difference once you place it on your card because it adds extra dimension and interest to your sentiment. If you haven't done it yet, I strongly recommend you give it a shot. Then I'm going to adhere the die cut word in the middle of my card front using 3M foam tape and glue pen. To add some interest and details to my flowers, I'm going to add some dots in the center of my flowers using Tonic Nouveau Crystal Drops Black. That's all for today. I hope that you've enjoyed this video and my card inspired to pull out your watercolor paints and do some watercoloring. If you have any questions, please leave comments below and I'll be happy to answer them for you. Before I go, I'm going to pull the camera back to show you how my craft desk looks like after my project is done. This is a clamp mount that I'm using to film the video with my iPhone, which cost me about $15. While I make cards, I love to watch TV shows like How I Met Your Mother or Gilmore Girls. This time I'm watching some English lessons on YouTube. Whenever I show my messy desk at the end of my video tutorial, I get a few emails from my subscribers telling me that they are so happy to see I'm a messy crafter. I don't know about you, but my creative brain works best in a messy space. How about you? What do your craft desk look like at the moment? Please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. If you like my video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And don't forget to visit my blog to see more details of my card and enter the giveaway. Thank you so much for watching and I'll see you next time with another video. Bye bye!